From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Taken together, the Federal Reserve's actions have contributed substantially to the significant improvement in financial conditions and to what now appear to be the beginnings of a turnaround in both the U.S. and foreign economies. Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke defends his record as chair of the Federal Reserve at a hearing on his nomination for a second term. We'll talk to former New York Governor Eliot Spitzer. Then 40 years ago today, Chicago police raided the apartment of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton and shot and killed him in his bed.
So we always say in the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips, I am a revolutionary.
We'll look at the life and death of Fred Hampton with attorney Jeffrey Haas, author of The Assassination of Fred Hampton, How the FBI and Chicago Police Murdered a Black Panther. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Defense Secretary Robert Gates is playing down President Obama's pledge to begin withdrawing troops from Afghanistan in July 2011. Speaking before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Thursday, Gates said there are, quote, no deadlines in terms of when our troops will all be out. Gates also said a U.S. withdrawal would probably take 2 to 3 years whenever it begins. Meanwhile, the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, General Stanley McChrystal, appeared before Afghan lawmakers in Kabul.
I think we now have clarity on our mission that we never had before. I believe we have clarity on our partnership better than we've ever had before. I believe we have capabilities, not just the additional forces, but also the improved partnership, the improved way in which we conduct operations, our improved understanding. I believe we have a commitment that is more clear.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, meanwhile, has rejected a proposal to create a war surtax to fund the escalation of the Afghan occupation. The tax had been proposed by House Appropriations Chair David Obey, who opposes the escalation. The New York Times is reporting the Obama administration has approved an expansion of U.S. drone attacks inside Pakistan. The move coincided with Obama's announcement on sending more troops to Afghanistan earlier this week. The White House is said to be in talks with Pakistani officials on launching the drone attacks inside the Baluchistan region for the first time. The Global Climate Change Summit in Copenhagen begins Sunday. In advance of the meeting, one of the world's top climate scientists is claiming he hopes the talks result in failure. In an interview with the Guardian newspaper, NASA climatologist James Hansen said any agreement to come out of the talks will be inadequate in averting climate catastrophe. Hansen says negotiations should instead be started from scratch. Hansen has called for more substantial emissions cuts than those on the table, as well as a carbon tax on major polluters. Earlier this week, Hansen addressed demonstrators at a climate action in New York.
As long as fossil fuels are the cheapest energy, they're going to continue to be used and their use will increase. So we have to put a price on carbon, and the money that is collected from this price must be returned to the public 100%, either as a monthly dividend or a payroll tax deduction or a combination of those. If we do those things, the problem becomes solvable. If we don't, it is the biggest intergenerational injustice in the history of the world. We'll be leaving our children and grandchildren with a situation out of their control. So we've got to begin to influence the policies that are being talked about. And what is being talked about in Washington now and in Copenhagen now is totally inadequate. It's greenwash. It's cap and trade with offsets, which will be just like the Kyoto Protocol. It will do nothing to reduce global emissions.
India, meanwhile, has unveiled a proposal to cut emissions relative to the size of its economic growth. On Thursday, India said it would reduce so-called carbon intensity 20 to 25% by 2020. The Indian government says the pledge won't be legally binding or subject to international monitoring. And we'll be in Copenhagen beginning next week, broadcasting from the streets to the suites to the summit. We'll be broadcasting for 2 weeks, and we hope you'll join us and tell all that they can get their coverage of the Copenhagen Climate Change Summit from Democracy Now! A U.S. company is being accused of helping finance the bloodshed that has killed millions of people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo over the past decade. In a newly revealed report obtained by the website Global Post, the United Nations says the Nevada-based Neotin Incorporated has helped maintain the conflict through its purchase of looted minerals that in turn fund arms sales. The minerals are used in cell phones and other consumer electronics. Neotin is said to be the first American company to be publicly identified as a purchaser of conflict minerals from the Congo. In Somalia, at least 23 people were killed Thursday in a suicide bombing in the capital, Mogadishu. The dead included 3 government ministers. Another 40 people were wounded. The nation's largest cable television company, Comcast, struck a deal to buy a majority stake in the television and movie giant NBC Universal from General Electric. If approved, the merger would give Comcast control of the NBC network, the Spanish-language Telemundo, cable channels including MSNBC, dozens of local television stations, and the Universal Film Studio. Media democracy advocates have widely criticized the merger. This is Jeff Chester, head of the Center for Digital Democracy.
Well, this is a real political litmus test for the Obama administration. Frankly, they should just have their FCC and their Department of Justice or FTC say no to this deal. There's nothing in the Comcast-NBCU mega deal that will benefit the public interest, consumers, or competitors. The Obama administration has a chance now to put its foot down and say no more media consolidation in the United States.
On Capitol Hill, the Senate has begun voting on the first major amendments to its version of a health care reform bill. On Thursday, Republicans lost an attempt to undo $500 billion in Medicare cuts that Democrats say are essential to expanding health insurance. The Senate also approved an amendment that would ensure women younger than 50 can undergo mammograms. Meanwhile, in the House, lawmakers have voted to make the estate tax permanent. The estate tax would remain at its current rate of 45% on inheritances above $3.5 million. Progressives have called for restoring the tax to its higher 55% rate from before President George W. Bush took office. Here in New York, a state appeals court has rejected a government attempt to invoke eminent domain to seize property in Manhattan for a proposed expansion project by Columbia University. In a 3-2 ruling, the court criticized what it called the government's, quote, idiocy in declaring some areas blighted to justify the takeover. In California, a judge has lifted a seal on court documents allegedly detailing how the FBI recruited an informant to spy on several mosques. The alleged spy, Craig Montiel, is seeking $10 million in damages from the FBI, which he says never fully paid him for his work. In Texas, a 44-year-old man was executed Thursday despite arguments he was too mentally impaired to be put to death. Test scores have shown the prisoner, Bobby Woods, has an IQ at or below 70, the cutoff point for mental retardation. Woods was killed by lethal injection less than an hour after the Supreme Court refused to halt his execution. And the music legend Stevie Wonder has been named a United Nations Messenger of Peace. Wonder, who is blind, will focus on people with disabilities.
It is truly an honor beyond any that I have ever imagined would happen in a lifetime to be able to be penned and given the opportunity to spread the message of love is truly in need of love today.
And those are some of the headlines.